Welcome to another wonderful episode of Heart and Soul. And today we're going to share about grief. Grief comes in many forms and waves, and it can hit you again after you felt you've done with it. It is a journey. And grief is, yes, it's for persons, loved ones who left this earthly plane, went back to the universe and back into the light. It can also be for a pet, but it can also be grief is the same when a relationship ends, especially a romantic one. We go through that stages. It's not like the person is dead. It's more like the person is no longer part of our life. And as a mom, when my daughter was studying abroad and leaving home, or my youngest was leaving home, it's a part of grief. It's letting go of what was and moving forward into the new. And we've all experienced grief in one way or another. And we felt today on January 30th, my dad's birthday. He was born 1932 and he died nearly 30 years ago. April 6th, it'll be 30 years. So yeah, I've lived longer without my dad here on the earthly plane than I had a life with him. So Janet, hello, welcome to this special, heartfelt, vulnerable topic.
It is. We talked about it just before we jumped on to record this, and it is a very personal, grief and loss comes in many different forms. As you said, my own personal journey of grief hasn't been necessarily losing anyone. It's been almost losing myself, losing my chance of motherhood, of what could have been or what I wanted to be. And then also as an expat, and you're the same, moving around, particularly the last move leaving Switzerland and moving back to the UK, it was definitely that transition was a period of grief as well, by leaving behind what we loved, and it was our choice to come back, but it then you still can be affected by that sense of loss of what we had and we no longer have. So there's lots of different ways that loss and grief can impact our lives, and at any age as well. And as you say, sometimes you feel you've dealt with it and it can come up again if there's more healing required. It definitely is a personal journey. There's no one size fits all plan to say this is how you deal. I mean, people talk about their stages of grief, and yes, there are, but there's no one size fits it all. Isn't sort of the healing and the process. For some people, they can manage to get through grief quite quickly. They're quite resilient people, and they're quite sort of accepting, and they're able to let go. It still is painful, but they're able to continue. Other people, it rips their heart completely into shreds, and they have to really rebuild everything. So there's no one size fits all. So tell us about your experiences with grief. I'm sorry, this is like, it is hard to go into this, but it's good to share.
It's fine. I mean, yeah, it was, I was 24 when my father died suddenly. You get that phone call 2 a.m. in the morning and your mom is on the other side and you definitely know something is wrong. And it never leaves you, that date is ingrained. Yeah. April 6th is ingrained in my body, in my story. And it has been Yeah, it has been hard. I mean, especially because his mom was still alive. My grandmother was still alive. So we had to go travel all the way to Kur and tell her in person that her son has died. And I think that was the hardest part. I mean, yes, my personal grief, but then I felt for her, you know, she lost her husband, her daughter, and now her son. And it's unimaginable because usually it's, you know, grandparents, parents go first and then the kids and not the other way around. And it was hard for a week. I couldn't go back to work. It just sort of completely shook me. I couldn't eat. Everywhere I saw my father, you know, many people observe that they see the deceased loved one in others. Oh, there's a man with a hat, or you know, everything reminds you of that person as you learn to live without that person. You know, you can't call them, you can't have lunch with them, you have you learn a new stage of life. And for me, even now today, I feel sad that he never met my children, because it was, yeah, 30 years, so 3 years before my oldest was born. And I feel he would have had fun with my kids, and also for my children. They sometimes, um, even just recently, my daughter said, "Oh, we know so much more about your father, the granddad we never met, than we know of the other grandfather we had for a couple of years." And of course, yeah, I share about my father. I know much more than about my father-in-law, you know. And so it's funny, you have that memory still there. And I think what we put on the note, we said, I think it's a German quote, but it goes like, um, people, or yeah, loved ones that keep living in your heart aren't dead. Dead are people who are forgotten, something along those lines. And that felt so, you know, that was sort of the first sort of anchor of, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can deal with this back then, 30 years ago. And yeah, then I had kids. We traveled the world, you know, we lived in different places. And then my end of the marriage, split up, divorce and everything. And then 20, 25 years after my father passed, a huge wave of grief hit me. And I felt like, should be done, you know. It's sort of, you know, sort of after a year you should be normal kind of thinking. But then it hit me, it's sort of a new wave of letting go. It's actually a letting go of what was. And and then there was years, I on the 9th of April I realized, oh, I didn't think of him on April 6th. And both is okay. It's not like he's forgotten, and it's not like I always have to mark the memory on the day. But of course, it gets easier as you go along. But it's that journey, like everything else in life. It's a journey, and it has ups and downs. And as long as we go with it and allow that grief, you know, that wave took me a day of crying, really tears blurring down. And that was good. It was letting go. It was a deep grief coming up. And part of that journey was also, for the longest time, I felt my father didn't truly love me because he criticized me, or he favored one of my sisters because she was shyer. She probably needed more of a male protection. And I lived in that as I thought, he'd never loved me. And then I looked at photographs from me as a baby, and I saw how he cuddled me and looked at me and thought, oh, he loved me. And that was sort of like, oh, it was such a liberation, and the understanding of, in this physical world, people deal with their own stuff. They can't always show their emotions, they can't always show their love. And of course, I studied mediumship, and I have a connection with him, and can talk with him, and have that sense of his energy. And yeah, 18 months ago, we went up to the mountains because he's from near Davos, that's our ancestral home. And then when we hiked there, I was sort of behind the whole family thing, my mom, sisters, and everybody. And I hiked with him, and we had a discussion, and I felt so close to him there. It was really good, and treasuring those moments. And yeah, you can't have a physical hug anymore. You can't have a discussion or something, but you can have it in a different form, and you have to sort of adapt to it. And for me, I think that's the good thing. Was soon after he had passed, I realized, oh, I was not afraid of dying anymore, because I would meet him on the other side. It was sort of, and I trusted that already, that our souls are eternal. It's just that we just leave the earthly body and then are in an energetic form. And yeah, it's a brave journey, and we face it. And if people tell you, yeah, but you should be done with it, or or it's just part of life, or all those little floskels you hear, and he thinks like, yeah, but sometimes people don't understand, or sometimes people don't know how to deal with it. And that was the same for me when beforehand someone's parent died, or someone, of course, you share your condolences, but not having gone through it myself, I could only imagine it. And then when my father passed, afterwards, my condolence card were more heartfelt. I understood what it meant. And yeah, it's a journey. And sometimes people grieve a pet, like an elderly lady grieves her canary, like her best friend has died, and it's true. So, or you can imagine. I mean, I think my Goldie is 7; she will turn 8. So eventually, I'll have to live without her, and that's sort of hard. It's a pet, or yeah, people leaving. And it's important we take the time to let the tears roll, to do whatever is needed. It's that, like we talked about last week, about compassion for self, that self nurturing, and listening within, and asking yourself, what do you need? How can you maybe honor or celebrate the life of your loved one? Like today, on that would be my father's 92nd birthday, we are celebrating his life by eating his favorite dishes, something from the canton of Graubünden, an original dish, and having a cake he loved. And I might even drink a beer tonight just in honor of my father, and doing these things. I think sometimes it's really about celebrating the life they had, and the journey you shared together. So this is my monologue. It's a heart and soul show with Janet, not just with Caroline.
No, because I know that sort of grief has touched your life in quite profound ways. I mean, for me, I didn't even know I was grieving with the whole infertility thing, learning that I'd gone through menopause and I would never have the children, the family that I longed for, that I just assumed that I would have. And to have that loss, and that was a deep loss because I was never supported in any way to understand or process that. And as a, you know, in your 20 young, early 20s, to be hit with that, you don't have the mental capacity or the skill set to work your way through that. And particularly when people are just saying you just have to accept it, that's how it is. And where do you start with that? I just did not have the tools, so the only thing I could do was shut down. And that was my way of processing, was to go numb, don't deal with it, push it down. So it was repressed grief. And that sat with me for, I think, several decades until I came to Switzerland and started my healing journey. So that was a long time for that to be held in my body. And I can definitely say physically, it did impact my system. And it was only when someone said to me, he said, you're dealing with grief. And I sort of looked at them and thought, but no one's died. And I couldn't associate that it was the loss of what you had expected, that you'd always assumed would take place, was taken away. And I mean, totally just hearing that and going, that makes sense. I'm suffering. I have had a massive loss in my life and I've never grieved. So that opened up. Let's say everything erupted like a volcano, because it was so repressed. And it was, you could, in your body and everything, it was just like so tense, so such an emotional release. And it was lovely actually to have that support then, and understanding that someone went, it's okay, this is what you're dealing with, and I can help you to get through that. Because I don't think that I just had no foundation of understanding how to deal with this at all. And it wasn't like people were saying, oh, we're so sorry for your loss. Nobody would talk about it to me. So it wasn't even that I could talk about it. So yeah, that really, really started that healing journey when I was open to that. And it was, don't get me wrong, it was not a simple overnight process, because there were years to be dealt with. And that has taken time. And I'm not saying it doesn't, as you sort of say, sometimes it comes back, it hits you. Every time somebody had their children, or they talk about, now I'm at the age group where their children are grown up and they're getting married and maybe they're having grandchildren now. And I'm thinking, I will never have that. I will never have the children and see them graduate or be at their wedding or hold your grandchild. I have lost not only not having children, I have lost all of that. And people don't understand how that really did feel, it shredded my heart. And I've worked with you, Caroline. You've helped me to rebuild it. You helped with the next layer. And it has taken a serious amount of work to heal from that loss. And then it's now the acceptance, right? Okay, that wasn't for me. I accept that. That wasn't part of my destiny in this life. And now I have my puppy, who I'm thinking, like, what have I done? I'm too old to deal with this. But she's gorgeous and she does bring me so much joy. And yes, at times it's not easy. But I do feel that I do have a role, and a nurturing motherly role, but in a different way, And that makes me, at least, that makes me feel good. That makes up for it. And anytime I can spend with somebody, and, if I'm there for them and I can support them through love and compassion, understanding, that is great. But you're right, as part of the process, one of the key things is learning these skills of like self-love and self-care and self-compassion, and to nurture and almost to swaddle yourself in that healing energy of like your love for yourself. Because I honestly thought, I'm broken, I'm flawed, I'm useless. So yeah, it was a great sense of loss in my life, and did impact it for so long. Now I feel like, yes, I've let that go, and it feels such a relief. And that's amazing. And another sense of loss, we said about, you've done it as well. You've moved countries, you've uprooted your life and moved, had that expat experience. And every time you do that as well, it feels like you leave a little bit of your soul or your heart somewhere else, because then, you're moving on and creating another new life. And I don't think people realize as well how that impacts you as well. That when you're constantly moving and rebuilding and moving and rebuilding, it takes so much energy and takes so much out of you. And you do when you're leaving, the friends that you've made, and maybe the lifestyle that you've gotten used to, and then you come in somewhere different. And yes, there's the excitement about new things, but there is that sense of loss as well. I mean, you've done that, so you know what I'm talking about, and maybe some of our viewers also understand. But if you've never done that,
Yeah,
you don't understand that process.
It is. It's that deep letting go. It's that sort of like cut off of something, you treasure it. And yeah, we can see the new and excitement and moving forward, and feel the loss. And I think it's in that both, some people only feel like, yeah, just focus on the good things and push this aside. It's not. It's the one side of accepting and enjoying life, and the other side of, you know embracing the hurt and the loss. And it takes both. It's not. And I think, yeah, it's sort of like, if I'd lived in a country where the sun would always shine, would we truly enjoy the sun as much as if we had snow and rain and all kind of weathers? It's the saying, like, without the rain you can't have a rainbow. And yeah, enjoying the sunny sides and integrating the rainy sides. And this is so important. And like you said, we keep on shutting it down, stuffing it down, and it sort of comes up with a vengeance. It's always there, unless we create that space and time for ourselves and let it come up. And often we are so afraid, we don't want to feel that hurt and pain again. We still know how bad it felt when it was so fresh. But creating that space and letting it, acknowledging it, there's still that part in us that is hurt. There's still that part in us who deeply feel the loss, and acknowledging that and breathing through it and seeing what's coming up, like more like an observer. We don't feel like we have to get into it, and it's not as bad. And then we can sort of breathe through it, acknowledge it, and letting it go on a new level. And yeah, and then we feel like, oh, now we've done with that, we can tick that off, and then we go along enjoying our life. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah.
And that's the journey. But I don't know, for you, for me, it was, of course, at the beginning, like with everything, is it grief or the opposite of self-love, like self-loathing or something. Or even when we feel good in energy and then we have a slump, and then it's sort of like, it used to be like 2 weeks low, like 2 weeks completely grief or something. And then we sort of see the upside again, and it gets shorter. and shorter, and the slump is not as deep. So whenever I felt a new wave of grief, it wasn't pulling me down so much, and I could go up, or sounds maybe bad, it's not like we always have to be up, but it's sort of like, um, whereas I was crying for 5 days, then I was crying for 2 days, or I could deal with it easier, letting it go. I think just allowing it, the process becomes easier. And so the process is quicker of letting it go, but truly trusting the process, that this is part of it. And I mean, there are tribes and traditions that deal differently with death than we do here in the Western world. And I think sometimes it's really nice how they celebrate life, or like death is part of life. For us, it's more like, oh, we only live once, and then if we're dead, then we're dead. And that's the greatest tragedy. So diving into different celebrations of life or end of life here on earth is also healing. I mean, this is more like with life, and of course with the grief of uh, romantic relationship ending, that's also, letting go of the dream of whatever and what you experienced. um yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, for me, the biggest thing was learning mechanisms to cope. And until I learned those, it's now my toolbox. Now I can, if they're going through that. And as you sort of say, it's almost like when something like that happens, it's like a storm raging. And, we have to weather the storms. And sometimes it is about just, as you say, observing and allowing what's coming through, and just almost like waves, just they're going to wash over you, and just not beating yourself up, just allowing the emotional, because particularly as us as empaths, we really feel it very strongly, and it does hit us. It's like a tsunami sometimes when something big happens. It really is. And you have to have that belief and faith that you will get through it. And I think that, the work that we do is all about, supporting people to give them the tools for exactly these situations in life that really can rip you apart. And it's about how to, deal with that when it happens, and know that you will get through it. And often with the right tools and the right frame of mind, the right belief system in place, the right sort of feeling from your heart, the energy, is it actually, it's like you grow from that experience as well. And as you sort of say, we can't appreciate the sunshine when we don't have the rainy days. And I can tell you right now, we're a bit sitting here in grey and miserable. I had the dog out for a walk and it was cold, and I can't wait to see the sun again. Because it just feels so miserable. And I know that for you in Zurich is also that sort of, in the wintertime, it's always like grey, and like that. So absolutely, it's part of life. It's part of the human experience. And we have to accept it and work through it. And I think once you get to that point, as Caroline and I are, we've been through so much ourselves, and it's our purpose, our soul desire to reach out and to support other people through their journeys, through their healing, and being able to learn the tools to be able to cope with these scenarios or situations when they arrive, because they do. Unfortunately,
Definitely.
it's part of life. And I think also what you said there about changing your view about death is also a very, I mean, I know when I faced when I faced death a couple of times, like yourself, you had your near death experiences when the car rolled off the side of the mountain, and I thought, this is it. And I thought, I can't do anything. And if this is my time, I remember thinking to myself, I've done some amazing things. I've had an amazing life. And there was no, I mean, there's nothing I could do apart from think, well, I've had an amazing life and thank you for that. So yeah, your outlook does change in so many different ways when you work through these healing processes, when you learn the power of self-love, when you reconnect with your heart and your soul again, the journey becomes a different journey. And
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
it really you start to see the world in a different way. That perspective changes, and it doesn't mean that you don't still feel things. Like when grief happens, you will still feel that, but it's a nice thing to know that you've got the tools and the mechanism to get through that in a healthy way.
Yeah, that you don't feel like drowning.
Yeah.
And for me, even in my healing sessions, especially working around the heart center, and there's always part of grief with every of my client, and a loved one is close by, and they just always want to share how much they love the person, and ask for forgiveness for maybe not being able to clearly show their love, but they're there, they're always there to support. And that's the part where the heart gets sort of blocked, or we sort of, I mean, when my father died, I just closed the shutters. I didn't want to feel that pain. And then when my marriage ended and other relations, the first heartbreak, it's sort of like, I never want to feel that again, rather not feel than feel the pain. And then you walk through life with this, whereas you could feel so much good. Of course, you can also feel so much loss, but it's that amplitude, it's that beautiful life. And when we can open our hearts and heal that part of the grief, lovingly, gently letting go, and clear and open the heart, we live abundantly again, in all areas, because we are just pure energy and pure love, and connected to our soul and our soul essence, isn't it?
I was going to just say as well, when you allow yourself to live from your soul, to be guided by your heart and soul, is that your soul also, you're connected into the divine source, the energy. So when you go through things like that, you've also got that loving energy to support you through that. So it's sort of, opened up. It's not blocked, it's opened up, and it allows that processing within your energy systems as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's a journey. Grief in loss is a journey.
Definitely. And there's Archangel Azrael helping. First of all, he helps. I say he, I know they're non-emotional, but he helps the soul go into the light at the time of death, when we leave our earthly body. But he also helps the people still here with the grief. So you can always ask Archangel Azrael to help you with the grief. And like you said, feel that loving support from the angels, from the universe, from the source, that life source, that yes, life goes on. And yes, you have the right to feel the grief and the loss. And don't let anybody else tell you that you just have to accept it and move on like they did with Janet. It's sometimes it's people don't understand or don't have, sometimes it's they're afraid of their own feeling, if they deal with that. I had that 20 years too, they can't hold that whole emotions, but if we can clear it and release it, we can hold space. And Janet and I, we can hold space for you to just experience that
Exactly.
beautiful
So
energy.
I was just going to say, anyone listening to this, if it is touching you, or you're going through, or recognize that you are going through grief and loss, reach out to us. We are here to support you as well, and happy to work with you to process and find your way through in a nurturing and healthy way.
Was a beautiful, beautiful episode in honor of my dad. Thank you, Janet, for being here.
Love and light blessings, everyone. Thank you.